You're now locked into Radio Juxtapoz, the home of contemporary art and culture conversation.
Coming up today.
And for me, especially that period of my life, I bucked authority. I could not stand, especially male authority, could not stand it. And so if any teacher or male teacher especially came to me and said, oh, you should be making more black art, or you should be making more black looking things, I would just be like,
said that?
Yes.
Wow.
This is Radio Juxtapoz. Hey, this is Doug. Thank you for downloading this episode of Radio Juxtapoz. This is the first in a series of very special live episodes recorded right here at the Armory Show in New York City. Myself and Evan pitched up for a couple of days to check out one of the hottest art fairs in town, and we managed to nab ourselves a couple of very special guests. On this episode, we sit down with the illustrator, painter, and lecturer Mark Thomas Gibson. Mark's work is heavily inspired by comic books, illustrations, movie posters, and the world around us. In this episode, we're going to be talking about his life as a lecturer at Yale and Philadelphia. We're going to be talking about the influences in his practice, black expression in the arts, and most importantly, what it was like being a young kid listening to Tool in Miami, Florida. Once again, thank you to the Armory Show in New York for having us out here. We hope you enjoyed this episode.
Don't you think?
Yes, I'm working on my core right now.
I feel like my back is like nice.
This is gonna make me a very loose interviewee.
Yeah.
Are we too rigid? Everyone looks like they've just got they've just sat on something rather questionable.
No, we're gonna drop something out the bottom. Yes.
Yeah.
No.
It's good. I like that because it sounded like you were about to do the intro.
Hi, I'm Mark Gibson. I just want to say thank you for having me here on Juxtapoz Radio. I'm here with Evan and Doug. Hi, Evan, Doug. So tell me a little bit about yourselves.
This is good.
Wait, where are we though?
Where are we? We are at the Armory Fair in New York City, 2020. We're at Pier 90. Mark Gibson will be with us tonight. He is.
I hear he's wonderful.
I hear he's wonderful. I've heard great things about him.
Nothing but good things.
An intelligent, far-seeing young man who has nothing but limitless possibilities ahead of him.
Who recently found out that he was an old man at a Tool concert.
Yes, I recently found out I was an old man at a Tool concert with me and one of my friends. That's very true. My friend Matt Jones, who's also an artist. We were standing there together looking at it slowly inside of ourselves, kind of quietly dying in that way that you don't tell your other friend. You know, you just kind of leave the concert, it's quiet in the car for a while, and you just kind of look at each other like, oh, shit. Maybe we shouldn't have done that. The memories were stronger. Anyway.
Sometimes it's nice to hold on to those things. You're like, okay, look, that was my youth. I'm not going to revisit that because you'll taint it.
Yeah, but you don't know that until you've done it, and you don't know it until you wrecked it. And there's some things you don't think you can wreck, but then you also start remembering, like, wait, I haven't really listened to their music like in 6 years. Like you don't. But
I like this band? I can't remember.
Exactly. But we had made a promise to ourselves, like back in our 20s, actually, that after they had stopped playing, it was like, okay, the next time when they come around, man, if it ever happens, we're going no matter what. And it was like, yeah, no matter what. And then we did it, and that's what happened.
In something completely unrelated to the art podcast that we're making with the artist here. What did you think of the latest Tool album? Was it like, yes, they're back in? This is the one that I've been waiting for?
I was hoping it was going to be a little bit further reaching than it was. It felt a little bit, for me, like it felt like it was too connected to where we had left them, and it always had felt like as a fan, as a young person, that they always kind of were breaking and moving forward and kind of taking me to new places. I also think I'm just in a very different place in my life personally.
It's hard to match them up for them, especially because it was like, it's been 10 years.
And then if you're an artist yourself, you kind of start thinking about like maybe how you were when you were younger, making art, and how it relates to musicians and making art, because they haven't been playing in a long time, so there is a little.
They're my 20s. They're my party, my younger like high school party day kind of mentality kind of thing. It's like,
wait a minute, Tool's your party band?
well, because we were like,
said nobody ever.
So I say when you say party, like what kind of party are we talking about? I mean, like we're talking about like listening to like metal, or we're talking about like drinking beers with your friends and like kind of like going out and kind of being amped about that kind of stuff. Like that's different. It's not. It wasn't dance music.
No.
Per
So
say.
What kind of scene were you in? And going back to this place, because this is where we are now.
Yeah.
This is where the podcast is going automatically.
Oh, Lord.
Let's go. Where are we? 15 years old here? 16 years old?
15, 16. Yeah, I was listening to them. You know, Warren G. I was listening to, you know, I mean, pretty much whatever.
That's a hell of a range.
Yeah, I guess I always had a range because I always had a range of friends. So I was, wherever they were at, I'm willing to listen to. My sister's like 10 years older than me. So then there was like a lot of Prince and a lot of like, you know, whatever was kind of happening. So I never was someone who was very like, I never had like a seeking kind of presence when it came to music. Actually, music for me, not until I was in my early 20s, did a lot of like lyrics actually start to form or hit me. It would just listen to something I've been listening to for 10 years, and all of a sudden I would be like, oh, that's what it meant, or like that's that feeling. Like I know when I say that to people, they're like, that's kind of strange, but it was something. I'm into like bass, I'm into like beats, I'm into rhythms, I'm into like sounds that kind of are bodily, you know, like they move your body even if you're standing still.
I'm 33. I had to think about that one there. I still have no idea what any of the Tool lyrics mean.
Yeah.
They use the weirdest words that they could possibly. It's like,
Lord.
you know, it's not even a thesaurus. It's
Right.
like it's like a Latin thesaurus.
Well,
that they
if you're
use.
like young and you're doing certain things like LSD and whatever, you know, it makes a lot of sense, you know. And it's also the 90s. It was a very different time. Like, I feel that was my age right there.
Yeah, that was good.
Right?
That was really good.
Oh God.
But it was a different time. And actually,
Yeah.
I think we don't take into consideration, I think in the 90s, we actually were mixing a lot of different cultures and different things.
Yeah.
That like we're seeing really played out now because people
Yeah.
have so many different tastes that they share all the time. But I feel like the 90s was a good era of
But there was a lot of tribalism. I mean, I think that still kind of goes on.
Yeah.
You know, if you were a metalhead, you looked like a guy that listened to metal music, and you didn't, you know.
Yeah.
But
oh
I also
my God,
feel
you
like
I
listen to hip hop and I listen to Britpop and I listen to all these different things, and I felt comfortable dabbling in all.
But maybe like Limp Bizkit brought it all together.
Well,
in this
all
way.
right.
Do you think they're sold short?
Wow, I didn't know we were
Hell
going
no,
so
I
literal.
don't. Hell no, I don't.
You're a Florida guy. I don't know if you hold some sort of.
Oh God, I mean,
Was Fred Durst from Florida?
no, it's just that like that
I
kind
think
of
they were
like
from Florida.
like rap metal stuff, like kind of hip hop metal, like that
Like
kind of
crossover?
thing. Yeah, that would happen there a lot, you know.
Yeah.
But also you have like mixes of stuff that from like Latin culture music kind of moving into that realm too. So it was like an odd fusion. It rarely ever kind of coalesced in a way that I felt was, well, not that it wasn't significant. It was just that it was not something that it isn't music that I would really hum to or think about today. But I think that those moments need to happen, like some kind of weird ruptures. Like sometimes things want to coalesce, sometimes things want to come together, and there have to be bands, good or bad, that do that work. And you know, it's. I think about it like if we're all a bunch of amoebas and amino acids and stuff like that, and there's some of them that have to do certain work.
It's like that first fish out the water.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, that first coelacanth that decided to come out of the water. You know.
Like,
he was taking a risk.
He was the Fred Durst of his.
Yeah, and he got 10 feet, but the next one got 15. You know what I'm saying? And it's so it is a part of the American experience of music that it is like a melting pot. But I'm sure there's so many like people between like the blues to rock that actually had that thing, but just never were recognized. You know, and they never were heard. But then two guys over,
eventually
like Turner hears something.
It seeps through.
Yeah.
What was Miami like then to grow up in as a kid? At that time, you said there was a lot of different scenes, a lot of different influences. What was that experience like?
It was weird because it was like, it was dirtier. It was a lot less like, this is before like Will Smith, Welcome to Miami, and the Thong Song, and any of that stuff.
Ruin it?
Yeah, it really did. It was like, I've heard the story be told, and I could be completely wrong, and I'm sure like your fans would be able to correct this hard. But I remember like I moved to New York City, and when I moved to New York, they were still having playback with videos. Like you could see like Nas on the street, like actually like performing, and there would be like guys doing it, and they were doing all the playback really loud. And then I believe it was Giuliani who put a stop to that. So a lot of people in the industry then moved to other places, and Miami was one place that people started going to. Thong Song hits, and a lot of other stuff starts to happen down there, where you start to see, if you think about it, like R. Kelly or Jay-Z, other acts. If you think about that period of time, lots of things were happening in Miami visually that started changing the way people saw Miami. I mean, a lot of that, South Beach was just a retirement community. Really beyond like Versace's house, you'd look around and be like, nothing. I mean, there was stuff, but it was
the idea
old.
of South Beach as it is seen today was not happening.
In high school, when me and my friends used to go to South Beach, like to hang out on the sand at night and just like, hang out and just like, just be by the ocean, be friends, hanging out, doing whatever teens do. It was like, you tell people that and they're like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Why are you going to the beach? Like, why are you going to the beach? And you could go to the beach. Nothing. We're talking about like air pushing empty boxes down the street.
Wow.
Desolate.
So how do you feel about it now?
I was going to say Art Basel Week.
It's
a different kind of blowing
I don't
in the
go.
wind.
I haven't gone. I've never been.
Because of that reason? Because this is home and it's kind of too much?
And I always had an issue with being from a place that was a tourist destination and kind of feeling like, especially with the economy there, the education system there when I was growing up wasn't that great. I was a part of an education system inside of that was beneficial to me as an artist because they had a magnet art school program that I got in my fifth grade. And so I went to an art elementary school, middle school, high school. But what you would see in that program early on is that they would base them in like usually poor performing schools and usually within black communities. So you would be all of a sudden given this little side thing and you almost be told that you were special and that you were different because you were like gifted in some way, and these were like you were their betters, and it was like really disturbing, especially as an African American kid who was also from a neighborhood like that. Just because I can draw or just because I'm like interested in these things, I'm just immediately we've already bifurcated us,
and you're automatically creating a complex in yourself and other people around
exactly.
you.
And so you would see these things, and we were like, this is like the era of like Rodney King. This is the era of like racial disharmony that was actually happening in the country that you would see. Like mostly in those magnet programs, you would have lots of white kids bust into black communities. So they would get their butts kicked, they would get their stomped. And so like one or two of those guys I know are now in the Republican Party, like in the RNC heavy, and I would think about these moments of like their experience with black bodies are ones of violence, ones of turmoil, but like where they weren't given the context for any of that. Mm-hmm. So they didn't have the context for why this neighborhood is in poverty, why these students are angry, why they're frustrated. And so then when Rodney King's like abusers get off, that was it wasn't just in LA. It was all around the country where people were set off by that. So as a young person trying to deal with that and seeing that there within the school system there wasn't a structure, or within the greater community of, let's say, Miami, there wasn't a structure to have that conversation or to speak through that or think through those kind of things. It was still kind of in that weird zone of what was that Whitney Houston song, like about the children of the future, let them lead the way. Yeah. Like you'd still have like performances like during like lunch period where like kids are singing that as kids are enacting this thing for the adults in some weird way to like project some sense of possibility in future. But the real conversation around, like, let's say those lyrics, there wasn't like a teacher or somebody leading that conversation. Like, what does this mean? What does it mean to make a song like that? What does it mean to try to project that? What future is possible for people that this song seems to be describing and discussing? But that wasn't there.
What were you doing at the time that kind of caught the eye of people to put you in this program? Like, what were you drawing? What kind of drawing? Is that what it was?
It's funny because I don't really typically think of myself having like an inner connection towards the arts because my family don't make art. They were not interested in it. My mother was supportive. My dad wasn't when I was younger. He became supportive when I was older. But my aunt Rini, who's not technically my aunt, she's kind of like my godmother.
She's one of those ones.
Yeah, she's one of those.
We call her auntie.
Auntie.
We call her
family. She's family.
She's around.
Yeah.
It's good enough.
Exactly. So Aunt Rini, she sees me and I'm like underperforming in school because I'm ADD and I'm dyslexic. And if you haven't been able to already pick up with that on this podcast, that like how I jump around to a lot of different things, I think tangentially, but I usually can come back around. So back to around. My Aunt Rini, who was actually someone who worked within the school board and was working with kids with special needs and kind of helped create that curriculum for Dade County Public Schools. She saw that I just loved to draw, and that's all I wanted to do. And I would sit there and I was drawing like Wolverine. I was definitely into the X-Men as a little kid, and the X-Men like animated special. Like I remember that just blowing my mind, and I just drew. And she's just like, does he do this all day? And she's like, and my mom's like, that's all he wants to do. He doesn't want to do anything else but do this. And she's like, no, there's school for that. And my mom's like, for what? Like for drawing? And she's like, yeah, it's a it's a thing.
It's a thing.
And so I applied to this program at a school called Rainbow Park, and I got in. And on my first try, you know, sometimes kids had to try multiple times, and I just like did, you know, I had a sketchbook, a bunch of weird little things, and they were like, "Oh, he's going to have to stop drawing this comic book style, though. He can't draw like comic book stuff. He can't do that." And I was like, "Whatever, man, just let me draw." And so
what age are we talking here?
I don't know, what's 5th grade?
Well, that's what I because we have a different system in the UK.
That's about 11, 12.
Yeah, 11, 12 was
yeah,
it? Yeah.
It's 10, 11, 12. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think it was like a 10 or 11, and when I got in, and so I went there, and all of a sudden I'm around kids who can draw, but then there's like, I've always was like a competitive drawer as a kid. Like I'd be like, I can draw a Lamborghini better than you, or I could draw like a Ferrari better than you.
What was it about the X-Men universe that was so appealing for you, particularly?
Oh, I mean, I think probably the line work of those books at that period of time. Also, the color probably arrangement in those books were probably pretty strong at the time. I remember like just seeing Dazzler and like, or seeing certain characters like their power projection. You know, like something like Cyclops, or like, you know, Wolverine's character at that time was still Wolverine. You know, he was still kind of like an aggressive misanthrope. You know, it wasn't something where he, you know, it wasn't Hugh Jackman Wolverine at that point. I think it was that, but it was any book. It was like, I believe it was like an early Wolverine that I picked up with like Wolverine fighting the Grey Hulk. And that was like on a trip out with my dad. We were going on a fishing trip in the Keys, and I was like at a little road shack place, and they had a comic book, and I remember picking it up, and that's all I did the whole trip. I just looked at it. I just like went through it, kept flipping.
Was it the colors and the illustrations more than the narrative?
It was the ink. Yeah, it was the ink. It was the lines. It was that. It was the drawing. It was the kind of drawing that later I would like find in like looking at like Hokusai, or if I was looking at, you know, Kuniyoshi or Kuniyasada, like that kind of work where that I didn't realize that was present in Japanese woodblock. It wasn't the kind of marks or lines I didn't know that were like there in Domie. Like I didn't know that there was an actual connection in drawing and illustration to these other high art forms. But that's where I could find it. That's where I could get it for $3, or like back then for like $1.25.
So how did this art school then, this program, start to change you or pull you away from this?
Immediately, it was like, you know, this is the canon. Here's the Western canon. Here are the cave drawing paintings.
Okay, so they did
France.
strip the comics from you.
Oh,
or they tried to as much.
Well,
as
I mean,
they could.
I had it, but like I'd always have to, you know, I had my little sketchbooks, and I would always draw like weird characters, and I was negatively influenced by Rob Liefeld. Sorry if you're a fan out there, but up for this podcast, but you know, the hand thing, the arm thing, the body structure of that work was not helpful. I understand as a comic artist, or as an artist making that kind of work, these are expressive lines that are to define characters, so I understand that. But as a young person, what I was looking at and looking for, it was anatomy, it was story, it was fantasy, it was an ever-ending story. It was like kind of beautiful. It was you would talk to your friends, and you all know like weird parts of it, or like someone's older brother had been reading it much longer than you, and they would like kind of let you in. You know, it's like the older brother thing with music. Like for me, it was with comics. It was like, you know, someone's older brother like had really been reading like X-Men since the 70s or something, or had been reading like Silver Surfer back in the day, and they would like tell you about Silver Surfer and Galacticus and all that stuff.
Did your folks get it?
Well, my parents, they were kind of like, no, they wanted me to be an athlete. You know, like my family, like all the men of my family are pretty good size. My mom wanted me to play baseball really badly.
Why do you roll your eyes on that one?
Just for the listener, there was a little sass in that.
Hey. No, it's just more like I just.
Wait, were you good at baseball?
No, I was horrible. Okay. I'm horrible.
Okay. All right,
I'm flat-footed. I'm like I have like the genes, but they didn't organize correctly. No,
look, I just thought you're like a star baseball player who took a turn.
Oh
no,
yeah.
Okay.
No. The only thing I got is what I got in my hands, man. The drawing. That's all I ever really had. And so it was like. But, you know, so they wanted me, and also because I think it is a lonely practice.
Yeah.
So what they saw was a lonely kid. What they saw was like a kid who was like bookish and inside of himself, and they wanted me to be externalized.
And were you?
Not for a very long time.
Okay.
You know, I mean, was I kind of to myself? I've always had very strong friendships. I've always had friends. I have friends or I have people who maybe I don't call every day or every year, but they're from like kindergarten, and if I were to call them, they would be like, hey, what's up, man?
It
wouldn't be like,
I like that kind of friendship,
I
man.
do too.
Low maintenance friends. That's the best kind of friends.
Yeah.
Like seriously, that's the
yeah.
one thing that I would say to as advice to like younger me.
It's
like just low maintenance friends.
Yeah.
Keep them, and anyone that demands your time and your attention, get rid of them.
So you don't like me anymore? Is that what's
No,
going on?
you're as low maintenance as they come.
Okay.
Your emails are like a sentence if I'm lucky.
Actually, it is. He's very easy to access in this way that's never pretentious, that's never kind of like hierarchical. It's just like two guys just talking to each other, and you're like, it's a friendship in a weird way.
Yeah.
It's pretty nice.
We just turned that right.
Yeah.
I'm humbled.
Yes, let's talk about friendship.
No,
Evan.
but so, well, this is interesting when you talk about friendships and when you talk about community in the art world.
Yeah.
It is interesting how you do find peers that you are that remain friends that you can have conversations with, and every artist that we always talk to on the podcast always talk about these little communities that they build for themselves. It's very small, but if it's interesting how like some people might see the lonely kid. It's just a different kind of way of expressing.
Yeah.
I think community in the art world is underrated.
Yeah.
And I think that the solitary practice also is something that there is a lot of kinships that are made in the struggle to make work.
Yeah.
And to express yourself. So I kind of want to talk about like a little bit of friendship in the art world.
Well, I think for me, since I'm naturally a bit of a loner. So, and I mean that like not in some kind of cool way. I just like seriously like it's like I say it, and that word has that kind of connotation, but it's like really I am a person who tends to like want to just draw, who tends to want to just make my stuff and play with like my toys almost, and play in my imagination. So I've been very lucky to have friends and people in my life who would almost like pull me out of it, like forcefully pull me out of it, or always just kind of show me a certain type of kindness that would always like make me go like, oh yeah, like these are my friends, or these are the people who care about me, or like they show up for me and I show up for them, and like but they've been like tight friends, like the kind of guy who would like drive from another state to come help you move kind of friends, like the kind of people who like when you break up like got you, but not in this kind of way where like they let you like be completely unaccountable for your side of your shit, like the people who like show you reality and like wake you up to it, the kind of people who help you like get a job when you really need it, the people who like you help get a job when they really need it. And I think that kind of structure, that kind of thing is actually trains you to actually probably be a good steward of the art community, because in this community you will see people, if you stay here long enough, that are up and then they go down, and other people go up and other people go down. And I remember years ago hearing like Alex Katz talk about this wave, and he's like, every 10 years I come back into fashion, and it's like if you go sit down and look at some old art forums, you'll see it, you'll see him come in and out. And it's that kind of thing that you do in the downtime. It's what you do with your friends in the downtime. It's what you do with your friends in the uptime. It's your community, and it grows. And that's where those late night conversations, when you're talking to other artists, that isn't about like how much money something sold for or who's getting in what and all that kind of garbage. It's really like those things are about like, what kind of universe and dialogue is your work performing, and sometimes finding how that I can see your universe from my universe. I can see what you're performing and what you're creating from my plane, and what are the shared components of that thing. And then those kind of conversations about our realities and our separate realities, and what we share in those realities is what I always find like nurturing and incredible and actually significant. It's just that sometimes you may meet certain people and they're not there yet, or they're not a part of that. They're not in that frequency with you. And I've learned to be more open to that lack of connectivity. I used to be like a little bit more angry about when that, like, why can't you see it my way, or why can't we connect? And now I'm more or less like I'm more patient. I've lived a little bit long enough to now to be able to say like, oh, probably 3 years would probably be cool.
Does teaching help this?
Teaching has helped that a lot, because sometimes you'll have perceptions about what you think a student needs and it is not what they need. You'll have perceptions around what you think you can give someone and you actually can't. And also you have to be honest. You try to be as honest about who you are and what your intentions are with the student and what you think they can do, and try not to hamper them as best as you can. The hardest thing I think as a teacher depending on the program that you're working in, sometimes you're in closer proximity to the students. So the issues can be that you become a part of their world instead of them becoming a part of yours. So all of a sudden, like you start to know about their infightings and their relationships and their struggles with trying to form a community. And it is difficult to be almost like a referee. It gets to be frustrating because you can see how some real basic crap keeps people from actually coming together, and also in the space of where they start to feel competitive with each other because of the art world or because of the art market, that they start to feel that those friendships will start to break down, and the weird divisions and the weird quadrants within the market of race, identity, gender, how the work is being viewed, what spaces is it going to go towards, what collectors are interested in what, and all this other kind of stuff starts to create such division, these wedges. And it's like those wedges they're not the reality that we should be trying to build. They're the wedges of like other people's BS. And if we can try to fight against that, but it's very hard to fight against that when you have like a huge student loan debt. It's very hard to fight against that when you don't have familial support. It's very hard to do that when you're trying to get a studio and not have 5 jobs. It has been weird watching the journey of so many young students, and some who just come out and they blow up and there they go, and some are out there struggling, and like, but the talent part of it isn't a part of even the equation. Like I know some kids out there that I've worked with that were geniuses, simply geniuses, and that they will have their day. But right now, they're not in the limelight.
They're not able to make it connect somehow.
For whatever reason that might be.
Back in this earlier period, what was your art trying to say? What was it reflecting? What were the worlds? And how has that started to change to where it is today? And what were the kind of key moments in that change of direction?
I think when I look back at my older work, a lot of stuff about race and a lot of things that dealt with my identity as a human being were coming into questions like very early on, and looking at some of my high school art and even my middle school stuff that I was doing. And it wasn't like at that time I didn't really have professors who were showing me like any black artists.
Did you have black artists as your peers?
As time went on, fewer and fewer. Because it was like the magnet program from like your 5th grade, then you go into like your middle school, and then you would have to test into each one of them. And it was like, so the spread of how it was from around the county got larger, but the actual individuals who were actually participants in it, we were fewer and fewer. And then there was like, as you start getting into like our high school, you had started having kids who had very different economic backgrounds, extremely wealthy families, maybe even celebrity families. Like, and all of a sudden you have kids who are from like Carroll City and like, Overtown, Liberty City, Goulds, like all these other neighborhoods where that's not going to be the case. So you start to see this kind of income disparity. But yet the students are good kids generally, and for the most part, many of them were inclusive, and it was almost a little bit like ShangriLa. And for me at first, I remember like the first day, someone tried to hug me, and I almost punched them because
what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah, because I'm so used to like, okay, you're going to falsely hug me if someone punches me in the back of the head, or someone's going to do something to me. Like
you were waiting for it.
You was waiting for it because that middle school I had gone to, that was all it was. It was just constant fighting. So it was like, all of a sudden you're in a space where we have like kind of, you're in this like that weird kind of hippie revival 90s moment.
Yeah, like we're all creative together kind of thing. Yeah,
everyone's wearing patchouli and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, what does that smell? And everyone's kind of like, and girls are wearing like sandals and flip-flops, and everyone's like almost kind of this free love vibe. And I'm like, I have no idea what any of this is, I'm thinking about Louis Farrakhan and like on Meet the Press and like all this other kind of like my home, having the debate around politics and around what was happening in society was always forefront. So though I might have been walking through a ShangriLa like experience, I always had these other things in mind, or where I was returning home to was not that space.
Were you not able to express that stuff when you were at the school? Because it just didn't relate to anybody?
It did relate. It didn't. It didn't really relate. And like there were moments when those things would kind of come out, and then that's when you'd almost figure out who your friends were, because they're the ones who could, and they may not look like you, but they could connect with it, and they would see it, and they would understand it in some other way or other capacity. But then I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to speak to my experience because I didn't want to sell my experience. I didn't want to sell this. I didn't want it to be a part of performativity. I felt that like for sometimes it was performativity because it was like, oh, you this, so you should make this. And for me, especially at that period of my life, I bucked authority. I could not stand, especially male authority, could not stand it. And so if any teacher or male teacher especially came to me and said, oh, you should be making more black art, or you should be making more black looking things, I would just be like,
said that?
Yes.
Wow.
And I would be like,
I always like hoping that's not the case, but then I hear these storylines.
So that kind of quite a common
yes.
thread.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From institutions.
From institutions.
From big institutions you may know.
And this would be white teachers, white lecturers.
Black.
So if you had a black lecturer, they would say the same thing. Like your work has to reflect this.
Or you should go into design because that's the only way you're going to make money. It's a very different era. It was like I was kind of at this weird cusp, like in the early, like the late 90s, early aughts, where that was still the conversation.
Because the conversation today is definitely in a different place from where it was then.
Oh, yeah.
And do you think that this is in a healthier place? Is a better place? Do we have more, or is it going too far in one way? What's your experience on this?
It's healthier.
You're in touch with the youth.
I think. I'm in touch with the kids, the youths.
Yeah. How old are we?
Yeah, exactly.
You're shaping minds at the moment.
Exactly. Yes. What have you done today? No. It's like I have to listen to them, and they're under a lot of pressure. They're under a lot of different stressors, and I think it's a different animal because I think a lot of them have experiences from earlier in their art education to see so many different ways to perform identity, if that's the choice that they want to make as a central subject of their work, that you are seeing a bit of variety. But I still do think that the debate over like figuration versus abstraction within African American art or the Black diasporic art form is still like kind of there, and it's a weird ebb and flow. It's like there's gonna be so many books written about this throughout the ages going forward. It's going to be it's something about self-construction, self-identity construction, and image warfare of like how do we perceive? Do we perceive ourselves as a whole, or do we perceive ourselves as individuals? And the question of what does that mean to feel beholden to the whole versus being beholden to the individual is in the end an individual choice, I believe. And self-expression for me as an artist has always been like paramount. But I remember this one thing, and I probably brought it up in this article that we'd done a little while back about, and I'll say it, I was at Cooper, and it was like me and maybe this other guy, Herbert Weldon III, with the only like two black painters that I could kind of really remember. I mean, there was like other people within diaspora, Black, Latino, Dominican, but maybe Puerto Rican, but there was like me and Herbie, and I remember I had done this painting over break of me as George Washington, and it was like, with the white hair and the face or whatever, and I wasn't like overly tinting my skin tone. I was actually trying to get as close to my beautiful bronze complexion, deep bronze complexion, and it's me, and I'm kind of goofy, I have a round face, I had glasses or whatever, and I just thought it was funny. And I remember just like students being like, what are you trying to pull over on us? Like, what is it you're trying to do here? And like, it was so hostile. And I was just like, I just thought it was funny if I was be the first black president, if I was just funny, but there was no dialogue for it. There was no dialogue from our professors at that time for it. They were not offering any kind of, no one's giving me a reading, about like African artists, or no one's talking to me about Kara Walker. Like no one's doing any of that, It was just simply like, we're in postmodernism and like, we don't really, and I'm like, well, from what I'm kind of getting about postmodernism and this sense of merger that's possible and creating new language, like wouldn't this fit within inside of that context? And it was like, but I did not have that language. I was a sophomore or junior at the time, so I was just like, what, screw it. I'm just going to paint animals. I'm going to paint weird stuff. Well, you were doing a couple
things there. You were doing humor, which Doug and I have been talking a lot about. Humor's kind of weird place in the fine art world. Yeah. And also you were
politics.
doing yeah, exactly. I was just going to say, and identity politics, like it was those are at the time I could see being,
they operate well when they're in the known, but and it's like when it's the unknown, which I'm more interested in, it doesn't operate very well, because it's something where people come up towards it and it's like it can easily opt in or opt out, or I don't know why. I'm still trying to untether that.
But what was like, what's the game-changing moment where people started looking at figuration and certain elements of Black identity in ways that like really brought it into the the lexicon as strong as it's has emerged in the last couple of years.
Thelma Golden, Student Museum of Harlem. I mean, I think her exhibitions in the 90s, in the 90s, I believe, and then like also in the early aughts, like just things that she was trying to bring up around like black male identity, black identity in general. I think that these shows were pivotal in making people. At the time, it was a real moment of people either opting in or opting out, and like writers opting in, critics opting in or opting out. And like,
what do you mean by opting in, opting out?
Well, because there was a certain condition. There was a certain condition of where they no longer had control over the narrative of how to perceive this work.
Yeah.
And that lack of control, and that's why there's a conflict within me even in describing this and discussing it. Because I like the idea of the rupture that it performs, and I like the idea of the questioning of what is established and who has power, and that by just simply putting this black body into a space, it somehow throws all of this crap out of whack. No matter how liberal the people think they are or how progressive they think they are, when you actually just do something still as simple as that, it still creates significant rupture inside of a space. And that I cannot deny. And I always try to think about, like, for my own process, and this is where the difference of being a teacher and being an artist comes in, or what I'm starting to learn. That question of the level of rupture and to the degree it does that work is significant to me. Now, whether for the student that where they're comfortable at with that rupture, or what they're comfortable with in the dialogue around the black body, around the black form, around black identity, around like identity in general, that is their journey. It's hard to be supportive and to be critical at the same time in that. And when we are using younger and younger artists are moving faster and faster and faster into dialogue and conversation, it's almost as if the whole system is occurring at the same time. The evolution, the nuance, the depth, the growth. It's like almost like we're investing in watching it grow.
As a lecturer, how are you changing your approach compared to what you were experiencing when you were a kid?
I'm way more down for whatever. I mean, that's
on his CV.
Yeah, you're down for whatever.
He's down for whatever.
No, you don't want that as you're trying to like get a teaching job. But there's
it's like the last thing you put in the resume. Just
down
for whatever.
Yeah, a little asterisk down for whatever. There's an asterisk around to a bunch of like other topics, and then I'm like down. What does that mean? Down for whatever.
Just down for whatever, man.
Notes are okay.
Yeah.
No, I think what it means for me is that I was trained in a very, very rigid, linear, parallel actually linear history to my own cultural history, artistic history, and being brought into that, and then almost having to go back and almost like come down another path to learn the histories and my lineage of artists on my own and through like the help of other art educators or other institutions. I'm very open to the idea with students, like, tell me what you know, and then I'll try to tell you as much as I know, and I'll try to see if I know anyone else who knows anything more about this for you. And the students who are able to pick things up, and the ones who, when they ask me, like, I have a real problem with, let's say, drawing hands, or I have a real problem with doing this, something structural and formal, I'll say, these are these examples, these are these lessons I can give you, and these things I know to the best of my ability will aid you in that. But if I do that, and then the person doesn't do that work, then you've answered my question. A lot of my assignments that I actually give to students is to see, how do you respond to pressure? How do you respond to questions? How do you articulate yourself as an artist when given a prompt? And that tells me a lot. And it tells me sometimes, well, they don't go very far, or that's enough for them. I used to feel that like seeing that's enough for them as like they're lazy and they're not really pushing themselves and they keep going so much harder and they have so much like potential and I want to see them do this. And I don't know, I mean, maybe that was just too many like 80s action movies and BS, like that. It's a culture of that, of like, you have 2 years of this grad program and you're going to come out and you're going to be a fucking superstar. And it's like, nah, man, maybe you just go work in a like coffee shop for another 2 years and make some good paintings, and then those come out, and those are actually the thing that matter.
Do you think there's a lot of pressure on people? I mean,
in general,
there's always that pressure to be. Americans are seen as the best, the winners that will overcome everything. You know, when you watch an action film, when you watch.
You mean like the Manifest Destiny kind of thing?
Kind of. You know, like being anything.
You gotta
less
tell yourself
than
that when you're creating genocide. Yeah.
Being anything less than extraordinary is a failure. You know, you have to excel. Being average
is failure.
A failure. Do you think that exists?
Yes, completely.
And then also, like, I think if you show expressions of yourself as an individual and people don't like it, you feel like a failure too.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of that as well.
There's lack of support around the individual, about the actual individual, and it's like, so then people perform the individual process of, like, let's say gender or of identity or of sexual or racial identity in, like, kind of in a pluralistic way, which is understandable because we are we are art makers, we are in a mode of communication, you know, so to use these certain forms, and that's why I would say I use some of the graphic tropes or the comic tropes in my work, because they're modes of expression. I think of it as a mode that fits what I want to say the best. That said, the thing about in our culture, when you have education systems where people are from pre-K to 22, and then they were like, I want to go to grad school immediately, and then another 2 years of that, where's your personal performance formed? And that's not to say that you've not had pain. That is not to say that you've not had love. That is not to say you have not had a job. It's not to say that you have not grown. But it is to say that a lot of your formative understanding and morality and your judgment and your structure of this understanding of this world has been offered to you from an institutional context. And like, even if you've bucked and you've questioned it, you've been bucking and questioning with inside an institutional context and a very particular construct. So I'm always a little bit weird about it because I'm like, I hated school. I actually really, really hated school. I made teachers' lives hell.
Were you like a little prick?
I was a jerk, and I was like a jerk.
Like, I couldn't think of another way to say it.
I was a jerk.
You're a prick. Yeah.
I was a prick.
You're a little prick.
I was a jerk. I was cruel. I was very good at, because of my family and the way we debate everything.
You've got such a kind face, though.
I know. Well, that's the thing, you know. It's like, but then that face would be a face I'm sure teachers would loathe, because like I would sit and I'm very good at listening to arguments and conversation, and I hear when the person slips, and I will put that in, and I'll put it in my pocket.
Yeah.
And I'll let them dig.
It's coming back.
And then I throw it back at them, and then I twist the knife. And that was something
the teachers hated
and especially since my parents were both had studied history, and I would sit around and read history. So if there was something historical that was being discussed in a class, I was like, well, actually, in that date in 1868, like someone signed this here and blah 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 blah, and then they would be like, that's correct, but what I'm trying to describe is this, and I'm like, but you have to, I was that, and I mean,
can you
what? Sorry.
Can you recognize those kids in your in your class?
But what it happens back to me. But I realized what it was that I wanted and what I needed at that time is that I needed someone like me to offer a bit of training in decorum, respect, and empathy. So I have a student recently, and he's reminds me very much of what I was like, and he would love.
What's his name? Sorry,
I'm not saying his name right now. He knows who he is if he hears this. He's probably saying, and I know he knows, and he's listening to this right now, and he's laughing to himself, and he's like, "Yeah, that's me," and his peers are going like, "Yeah, that's him," and he loves because sometimes I speak in didactics or like one-to-one relationships to kind of, but I know there's more than that, and I know that the student needs to slow down, and that his brain is processing very quickly, and it's hard to slow it down, and it's hard to kind of like listen and be open and not bring like 10 other readings that you have to the conversation. Valid, totally valid. He probably will be a great teacher someday. But for me, that's the lesson I have to give to him. That's what I have to offer to him from my own life experience, is that you might have the ability to actually be a strong leader.
If you can learn how to process this and deal with it. You mentioned earlier that both your parents were historians?
Well, they weren't historians.
Were they academics?
No. My mom, she was the head of the breakfast. Well, she was the administrative assistant to the breakfast. God, it's been so long. She was an administrative assistant to the head of the breakfast food division at Burger King Corporate International.
Okay.
And my dad was a postmaster.
Okay.
But they both were people who loved anytime there was some kind of like documentary on that had to deal with history, or 20th century history, or like Byzantine period, or anything like that. My mom was more like general world history. My dad was more like American history of the last like 100 years or so. And that was just simply from either living it, viewing it, and just from complete interest, just novel interest.
I listened to a talk you gave a couple of years ago, and the kind of premise of it was almost like revising. It was challenging the stature that certain figures throughout history had. Where did that start to come, and when did you start to question narratives?
I think since that whole question around authority, I've always questioned like the myth making in America and the idea of how we perceive or how we're told someone is supposed to be. And I think like right now in the president that we have right now, that we see this very concerted effort on his part and those people in his side of his camp to create a very specific myth around this individual's power, status, and everything else around it. And then you can see the battle of hearing that same lie over and over and over again, and how it's actually some people are bending to it, and I think that's the same thing with like chopping down a cherry tree and and will not tell a lie, and or the way in which like even the Emancipation Proclamation occurs, or like all these kind of stories that leave certain people as heroes and others as villains. The way that we still probably can't really reconcile what happened during the Civil War, because there's so much whacked out narratives and certain things that need to be put to bed, and some things about winning and losing that we have to accept in our culture that we're not able to accept. From an early age, like we would debate like from all weird points, from like a racist perspective to like a MLK perspective, or MLK versus like Malcolm X, like whatever was up for grabs, because it was something I guess my dad was maybe my parents trying to teach me some critical thinking kind of skills. I don't know, but they just never saw the world as a simple binary. And they understood that maybe that there are they also understood that there was historical truths for why we're in certain situations. And I think from one side, I think from my mother's perspective, maybe that comes from the fact that her father died in the Korean War, and the way that war is described, and the way that war is written, and the way it's kind of brushed under the rug.
I was going to say, or not written about. Not really, for us as Americans growing up, we don't really learn
about the Korean War.
Yeah, at all.
And it's like, but here we are dealing with North Korea and these rockets, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, so here's something that we have this direct relationship to something that we kind of helped form to some degree, and that we are still dealing with it after all the people who fought in that war are basically dead. So I think to know or to hear, or even when I meet someone from a different culture or perspective, or someone, maybe it was the People's History of America. That was like something I read like towards the end of my high school years.
Is that Howard Zinn?
Howard Zinn,
yeah.
And just like those kind of moments of like that itch that you had inside yourself, like this can't be right, there's something more to this. And then to have someone like write out this history that starts to make you think like, okay, I was right, there is something more to this, or the way I would look at paintings and I would see like, wait, why do these people look like this in paintings? If this was like in the 1770s and this person's like 60 years old, why do they look like this weird kind of baby face? Why do they look all polished? That person I've seen people in the Northeast at 60 years old, they don't look like that. And they have modern technology, like these people have rotted teeth, like busted skin, scabies, whatever. They weren't, trust me, sorry to say, most white people don't moisturize. So I would say back then, they probably weren't moisturizing back then. I know that's a generality, but
no. That's gonna be the line that we lead with.
Yeah.
It's just gonna be. I welcome to the podcast. White people don't moisturize. I get down.
But if just from.
Can you give us a fun example? Not of white people that don't moisturize, but can you give us a fun example of some revisionist history that you've come across? I shouldn't use the term revisionist history because that's the name of another podcast.
Yeah, but I think revisionism. Within school books, I think about that a lot. I think about the idea that there's like there's school districts or companies that actually make the school books for all this for the country, and pretty much each state, each school district can look at those books and they can make their own choices. They can just edit out certain events. They can change language. They can say, slavery was like a necessary evil. They can take Thomas Jefferson out. Just take him out. Just take them out. These kind of moments of these like little micro cuts are the reasons why Okay, so it's funny was when you go to college, you have this whole thing where you start reading text together, and since it's the first time you're kind of dealing with people who've matriculated not completely, but matriculated through other cities' systems, and then you kind of come together, and you can almost kind of see like
the information that they've been fed and pick out exactly what book you're taking that argument from.
Exactly. And so we're sitting there and you'll have these kind of conversations and these kind of stories and you kind of hear things and you offer things to people and, you know, you're young, so it's kind of like a free trade experience. But what I realized was like, wow, I don't know this and you don't know that.
Yeah, it's so regional.
Yeah.
It's so regional the way that our education system is. Like for being from Northern California to South Florida, but it's just completely different.
Completely different things.
Yeah.
And what they'll say about like what happened in, let's say in Mexico and talking about the Mexican Revolution or talking about anything, any subject. That's the problem. It's that like when you start to dig, all of it is
problematic.
Revised. Yeah. It's like if you think about what we even are getting in the news today about anything and any of the conversations that we're having, it is constantly under revision. Now that does have something to do with human perspective. That has something to do with the idea that all of us have perspectives around events. It's just that we have, for some reason, do not have the same collective memory, and it doesn't seem that we're actually doing the work to kind of form a collective memory and history for ourselves. If anything, we're creating very, very different ones where everyone gets to be their own little heroes. And that's problematic.
There's something I'm interested in just because of kind of, you know, a lot of what we're talking about comes down to, you know, access to information, to free speech. Yeah. As someone that's involved in the institutions, what do you think about the idea of no platforming and kind of cancel culture? The reason I bring this up is because we were talking last night about this with Anna after we went for a couple of beers, and it was like, you know, what do you think, you know, it was, who was it, Milo... alt-right guy, whose name doesn't even deserve to be mentioned in our podcast.
UC Berkeley, the campus that started the free speech movement, didn't allow him to speak.
So, as someone that's in the institution, if someone like that was invited to speak at your school,
that's happened. Yes.
Where's your kind of line on that?
It's complicated.
Okay.
It's complicated because it's easier as a student to be able to say "F this guy, get him out of here." It's easier as an artist to say "F this guy, get him out of here." But then when you're working as a part of an institution and you're working under what the guidelines of that institution believes, if they do believe in free speech, and what free speech entails is that a racist, xenophobic piece of garbage can speak like anywhere that they want and be invited to an institution and do that work, you know, then I'm kind of like, okay, all right.
As much as you don't like it.
Yeah.
You kind of you have to boil it down to that fundamental. Okay, so I believe in the institution that believes in free speech. So if we are going to go by that foundation, then I have to.
You can also develop. You develop ways to tell the guy to fuck off, because like you actually you start seeing what their argument is, and you can develop your own arguments against it.
Well, free speech works both ways, right? So people should be able to protest it, and people should be able to speak their mind about it, and then I think that there is room for then a debate. And if an institution decides that they want to have that individual there, then you also have to deal with the repercussions of that. Meaning that when you say the word repercussions right now in this moment, it seems like it has to be something violent, but the repercussions means that no, you need to actually do the thing that's hardest to do in this culture is have the conversation, and that means that then you're going to have a real debate, a real conversation with either students or certain proponents from both sides that actually discuss what is it that we're dealing with. That is the point of the institution of higher education, is to have those kind of conversations, as hard as they may be, because generally in most of our society, they're not equipped or they're not willing or whatever that might be to do that. When I say not equipped is that for most of the dialogue and conversation that we're kind of having, either if it's in the written form, if it's in the digitized form, if it's in the video platform form, like there's a brevity to that. The matriculation part of like education comes from the sitting moments in between and the coming back to the questions, coming back to the answers, reinterpreting them, having that conversation, the debate. Like that is where it kind of forms. It's just that when that space is not allowed to do that, or that space, because it's become so monetized and has become such a customer service driven enterprise that it doesn't want to deal with the customer not being right, that it starts to get into a zone of, well, then where is the space to have this debate? Because we don't have like a show on TV that for 1 hour where two people just have a debate anymore like they did back in the day.
Yeah.
You know?
I think,
it's not sexy enough.
I always think it's important too for people like this person we're talking about to go to a place where people are attempting to make sense of the world, attempting to become more enlightened, attempting to learn more, and they don't like what you're saying, and they find that what you're saying is repulsive, and they find what you're saying to be not part of what being enlightened is all about. Mm-hmm. And I actually enjoy them seeing that protest in front of them because they don't really get that.
Well, yeah, because
they get it in different. It's like it's a more articulate protest, which I appreciate.
Well, I think that so often the issue's over there or the issue's over here, and until the issue's actually at your doorstep, do you find out where you sit? That's until it hits your doorstep, you don't know where your friends actually sit on things. So I think that it's important, and as brutal as it is, and as maybe even psychically damaging as it may be for some people, it's we're all in this together. That is something I surely believe. I think that it's just the hardest thing that I've been able to try to deal with in this presidency is the practice of some type of empathy, to try to have like the conversations with individuals who do not see me as human, to have conversations with people who do not respect me, and to try to like understand and navigate, not win an argument, not to beat them, but to hear them and to understand, try to perceive their perspective, trying to perceive their reality and how they may have come to whatever assumptions that they have. And that has been some of the hardest work I think I've ever done, because I don't know if it will, where it goes. It doesn't give me an easy answer. I don't go to bed and go like, oh, I just had this conversation with someone who really thinks that Trump supporters are not all evil because they met one who helped them do something, and so ergo they're not actually racist. You know, that kind of thing happens. Mm-hmm. And, you know, and it might be someone you just meet, and then you have to have that conversation. And it's not a comfortable conversation to have with someone about the perspective you have. And it's also very hard not to have that conversation and not trying to win. Mm-hmm. And not try to beat them, and not trying to make them
to change
them. You know, it's like this thing. And I think growing up the way I grew up and the places and how my body's moved to certain spaces is that I've seen so many weird perspectives. I've seen so many racist liberals in my life. I've met so many. There's this place back home in Homestead, and this used to be this kind of real rednecky kind of space. They used to have a giant like rebel flag on top of the roof of this building, and they kind of a tourist location. They don't have the rebel flag anymore, but I remember it when I was a kid. And me and my wife is white. We get out of this car, and this larger, heavy-set white man who is like in a little golf cart drives up, and he's like, "Who's your pappy?" And so my wife at that moment is kind of going like, "Whoa, what is this?" You know, she's from the north. She doesn't know any of this.
This is new.
Yeah, and I go like, "Mark Gibson's my dad," and he goes like, "Tell your pappy I said hi," and he drove away. And my dad had done something where, you know, he was the postmaster, so he served the community. And the postmaster back then, or in some smaller communities, is like seen as like, you know, an official.
Yeah.
You know? And so I look a lot like my dad. So it was this kind of thing where you were around people who would have like a rebel flag on their shirt or on their car or on whatever, and you have to listen to their belief systems around what they think that thing means for them. You know, but then I would offer what I believe it means for me.
And then suddenly it goes sour.
It could, because but the thing is that conversation is about 2 inches deep. That actual real conversation is about 2 inches deep, and it's pretty much gotten even thinner because of Rush Limbaugh, because of like Fox News, because of industries that are designed to keep it at a shorthand perspective of like da 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 da, and that's why you should do this.
Sound bites.
Yeah, sound bites that lead them then to, here's the action you should take that benefits not you, but somebody else. So when you can get them beyond that sound bite, which is actually a sound bite that has been very well perfected. I think it was Newt Gingrich who actually kind of came up with these very like specific wedge words and wedge issue words that when executed within speech, that they would break down conversation rapidly. But if you sit beyond that, and if you move beyond that, they have no other recourse. And then you find quickly, they find even quickly, that there's nothing really behind that argument. And then they have to become one thing. And the one thing that usually starts to happen, something that they probably haven't felt in a very long time, is empathy. And they have to start going, oh, I guess I could see how that would offend. Oh, I could see how that could be painful. That's not all cases. And that's another problem that we have. When I talk about things, I have to also accept the fact that this is not all cases. This is not everyone. Anytime and I think that's another problem, is like anytime I know I put my voice on a mic, anytime I know I write something, that the perception is that I'm talking about a whole, a generality, and it's not that. When I talk, and this thing comes back into the art, is that when I'm making the work that I make, I think as a younger person, I wanted to see how could I speak to everyone. And as I'm getting older, I'm starting to say, how can I speak for myself? And when I started to do that, that's when it became clear. That's when I started communicating with other people. That's when I was on a certain ground where I'm not trying to tell you about the universe and everything that's in it and why you should see this way, but I'm just saying, this is this neck of the woods. This is my perspective on it. This is something I've experienced, something that maybe you've experienced, and perhaps if I bring it to you this way, maybe we can start walking down the road together. Because for me, this whole enterprise of humanity, in the end of the day, comes down to this: is that if we do not walk together, if we do not talk together, we will fail. Once we stop doing that, the action and the communication, it's all over.
Do you think art is accessible enough for young African American kids?
Yes.
And do you think that they are as interested as more so? Does that change as they go up?
I mean, I think, I wanted my niece to be an artist. She had a really interesting hand. She could kind of mimic some things I was doing at an early age, I wanted her maybe to get into the magnet programs. I saw the benefits of like getting into the arts and, for me, and some of the students I've had in my life. But it wasn't for her. And that's the thing. It's not for everyone. And I don't think it should become like an enterprise in itself of wealth distribution, or like, we're going to get these people out of this community through art, and this thing. It's like, maybe they're not an artist. Maybe they're just not an artist. Maybe they don't really care about it. Maybe there's plenty of people. My dad can actually draw extremely well. And after he retired, he started drawing and painting, and he was good. He's very good. He has a better colorist than I am. I hate it. It's great. My mom can draw beautifully. Never did this when I was a kid, because they just were like, I don't know. I had to get a job. So I do think that I'm happy to see that there's so many people of color and so many different bodies that are actually accessing the arts. I think it's incredible. I think that the conversation is so much more healthier than it has ever been. I think that when I look around the room and I see just different people and I hear different people listening to each other, expressing what they want to do with their lives and what they want to make in the world, I'm like, you don't even know what it was like even 10 years ago, even 20 years ago. And I remember going to openings, and I hated going to openings in Chelsea, because I was like, I'm the only one. And if there's another one, that person is like 30 years older than me, or that person's completely, in a different track than me. And just because we're the only two bodies that look the same, we may have nothing in common whatsoever, but everyone assumes that we should. And so, what kind of pressure is that to put on someone who you know what I mean?
Who just wants to go to an art show.
Yeah. And what does that even mean, to just go to an art show? I don't know. So it's like these kind of feelings of like walking into certain spaces and becoming comfortable with them. Like, I'm comfortable right now in this fair because I have Evan, who I've talked to several times, in different formats. I have like other gallerists that I've known over the years and I've met, and I've seen them go from interns to gallery. I've seen artists and students that I've had in my life, and I see them on the cover of your magazine. I see people that I realize that this interwoven, entangled kind of thing is working, even if some people don't want it to. It's like that arc of history moves towards light comment is something I believe in, is that we almost can't help it. We have to nurture it. We have to fight for it. But I do think that we almost can't help it. The fight isn't as hard as we make it out to seem. We do have a desire to unify. We do have a desire to be together. We do have a desire to heal things. It's just that the immediate, reptilian part of our like primate brain sometimes says, mine. And when it says mine, it says not yours. And then we all go mine. And then it gets really ugly for a very long period of time. But then hopefully we come back to reason.
So our language is trying to change at a pace that something internal almost isn't prepared to catch up with.
Yeah, I think it's a part of the struggle. And I think that art has that ability to kind of display or talk about our compromised selves and to think about like what it is that we are actually trying to do. And then sometimes we actually can come to art and see that struggle and see that compromised self. And it's that also, as I become older and as a teacher, I start to look at and I would maybe say to a student, you do know this, or you could be doing that, but they aren't there yet. They're just not there yet. Or they don't see that yet. But the thing is, I have to also shut the fuck up a bit and look at it and say, like, maybe I'm not there yet. Maybe I don't understand that yet. Like, what do I know about being a queer 21-year-old woman? Really? Nothing. Other than what I've read, whatever I listened to, and trying to come to it with an empathetic heart. But when it comes down to it, I also have to be humbled by the fact that I do not walk in their shoes, as hopefully they are humble enough to be able to access that as well.
So we've gone this far into this conversation, we haven't even talked about the work that you have here.
Oh,
and then when we walked into the booth earlier with M+B Gallery, you're very happy with the work.
Yeah, I'm very happy with the work.
And I want you to talk a little bit about it.
We should talk about your work.
Yes,
I feel like we're an hour and 10, 15 minutes into this.
We haven't even talked about your newest work, but it's great because we were saying how there's some new techniques you were trying. There's some parts of the subject matter that are really fascinating. Just talk a little bit about
why black and white?
Yeah,
why black and white?
Yeah, because you do use color. Yeah. You have used color.
Yes.
But this one you've chosen not to.
We gave you an assignment for the Juxtapoz show to do something.
Black and white. Yeah, exactly. No, you just happened to be there at the right time.
Yeah, it was perfect timing.
But it was like under the principle of something I've always believed is keep it simple, stupid. There was something kind of happening in the work where I started making these larger drawings with ink and on paper, and they were just coming out, and I was just executing them, and they were just like damn, and like anytime I started thinking about like this idea of falling forward, like because ink you can't redact the same way with ink on paper that you can in other mediums, and so you have to freestyle, you have to improv, you have to fall forward. The sound and the rhythm of the drawing is just happening. You got to work with it. So whatever concept you have, you're in it, and it gets deeper usually if you allow yourself to do it. So for a long time, one of my friends, another artist, Austin Lee, about 10 years ago, this dude was like, when we were in grad school, he's like, why don't you just go black and white? And I was like, man, get out of here with that. You know, and it's like I like.
Says
to draw.
Austin Lee, who does like
the most colorful,
so much color right now.
And so we were, because we always had these conversations around color and high impact color. And so my idea, my design, the mode I was using color was to work high impact with compositional subject and forms that actually were maybe possibly disturbing or that were off-putting, so that your eye was like attracted, but then you were kind of locked in this like loop. And so that's why I was using that kind of color. But as the conversation started to shift and as the politics started to shift, and the books I make are always black and white, drawing is always like the base principle of or the cornerstone of my practice. I was like, well, let's see what I can do with it, and let's see what happens if I just kind of like give myself further over to this practice. And so I started making work that didn't need to be reconfigured in its interpretation from sketch to larger implementation. It's the best way I could kind of say it, is that my brain would always have to think. I would maybe make a black and white drawing or sketch, and then I have to figure out how to color operate inside of it, and what does that color
and how to
say,
make it a big canvas piece.
And make it a big canvas piece and all this other kind of thing. And then it was like, I looked back at a painting I'd made maybe 1 to 2 years before I actually had gone to grad school. And it was very similar subject, but not in execution to something I was working on at the time for NADA. And I was looking at it, and I was like, oh my God, how did I do that? Like, how did I do that? And then it dawned on me, like, how I like changed it, how I manipulated the material to do that. And I was like, oh my God, that's it. And so then I just went back to the studio, started prepping surfaces, and then I started doing it. I was even talking to my grad students about it because I'm like trying to tell to them about surfaces and building proper surfaces and painting and like how much that affects the work itself. And then one day I was like, okay, I got to tell you something. All right, I'm not a sham, but there's something should have been doing a long time ago, and I haven't done it, and I'm going to do it this weekend. And I'm gonna do it, and they were like kind of, like they were like, what are you talking about, right? And I do it, and I executed it, and it's this kind of directness, and so the imagery that you'll see in the booth is a lot more. It has like the speed, and it has the contact that I've have in my other drawings, but now it's in this kind of painted form, and it creates this kind of. It hits hard, but it's a slow burn. It's something when you see it at first, you think you got it, but when you sit with it, it just keeps revealing itself and revealing itself and revealing itself and revealing itself. And it's something that I've always appreciated, is that to make an image that actually has duration within inside of it. I've loved the idea that a painting has that type of potential. And so with that, like the real understanding for the show itself, or the bodies of work, because I was always thinking of it as a show. I know it's a booth and an affair and people just walk by, yada, yada. But I want for those bodies to stop and they see and they start to make connections to kind of have something there for them. That's my promise to the viewer.
Well, it's also rare to have a solo booth at a fair, too. So there is something where it is kind of like your solo show.
Yeah, it is. And so the idea was to talk about, the name I gave it was like the common factor. And similar to if you're talking to a friend of yours and you just broken up with like the umpteenth person, and then your friend is like, and you're going on about how this person was so horrible, and I'm saying all this, but this is actually about me. And then
someone, my friend is doing this thing. It's definitely me.
Yeah, it was definitely me. And then this guy says to me, he says like, you ever step back and look at the common factor in all your relationships, and it's you? And I was just like, God damn it. And I think about that a lot. But in this case, I was trying to think about white supremacy being this common factor in a lot of the ills of this country, kind of going way back. And when I think about white supremacy, what I was trying to actually execute inside of this is that there was another piece that was supposed to be a part of this exhibition. There's maybe 3 other large pieces that were supposed to be a part of this exhibition. That one was called the Battle of Notre Dame, and it was to almost commemorate the Notre Dame students who fought against the Ku Klux Klan in the early 1920s when they came to South Bend, Indiana. They had come there to kind of celebrate their wins in the political system in the last voting period that had happened. And they come to this town and they're celebrating their thing, but they also come into a Catholic community. And for those of you who don't know, the Klan hated the Catholics, hated them immensely, and hated the Pope, and hated everything about Catholics, and definitely hated the Irish. So these young Irish students, they get into a brawl with them, and they get dirty, and they start kicking their butts, and they're like taking their robes and their glass bottles. Their kids actually had a wheelbarrow of potatoes, and they were tossing them at them. I know that's kind of weird, but
apparently effective.
Yeah, apparently effective. It has some kind of. It's very particular. It's like a joke, but it's what happened. And
was this the potato thing? Was this post-famine?
No, yes, I don't know.
This would be something connected to the Irish famine. That's what it would be.
Yeah, the students are chucking these potatoes at these guys, but supposedly the next year, the school takes on the name. I forget the direct individual who supposedly quoted this. This term had been used before. It had been used during the Civil War to describe the Irish, but the Fighting Irish.
Fighting Irish, yep.
So it's like to think about that. If you think about the history of that school, especially the history of school as it relates to race, even to think of them as also a marginalized people, as a people, or the people who were put under white suppression. The idea of even Scottish people under white suppression. Power and how we think about it and how we name it and how it's taken its forms is complex. And so I wanted to kind of have a booth to kind of show like we're all in this together, that we all have fought this fight against this ism. And so what can we do together? How do we establish ourselves to get to a place to where we can actually support each other and make change, to make significant change? I know this is all like, out there stuff, maybe for a bunch of paintings sitting in a booth perhaps, but like these are the things that I'm concerned with. This is the nature of the work.
This is your thought process as you're going in to create them.
Yeah.
This is part of the dialogue.
This is part of the dialogue. I did one about Charlottesville. I had another one called Pest Control, which is like kind of like as if like Klansmen are nuisances and they're like getting in mouse traps and they're like getting like sprayed with like, you know, bug spray and everything else. But you know, some of it that was more of a comedic, humorous take on it.
There's definitely that humorous element, but then it can very quickly get, you know, you're like, okay, cool, this is funny, and then it's actually, shit, this is actually really heavy.
Well, what I was talking with an artist, I was talking with a painter, Amy Silman, last night. We were having this conversation and about painting and drawing and abstraction and everything else, and we both were talking about the comedic, the line in comic books, those like whoosh lines or motion lines, you know, and like when those are seen inside of painting or when they're seen inside of movement, when they actually do the job of not actually telegraphing where they come and where they start, where they end and all that stuff, where they begin and end, that it's something that we internalize as a human being when we see that type of action on a canvas. So when I'm making these things and I'm moving and I'm kind of doing them in a rapid fashion, and then if I slow down and I kind of articulate something like that, I do believe that inherently there is a body sense. There is like an understanding of like goopy, sticky, heavy weight, disformity. There is a thing that you feel when bodies are tussling with each other and they're gripping at each other and they're fighting for something. I love that about the nature of that kind of graphic comic nature. You know, that's what the political potential of it, I think it has.
I think that's a pretty good place to end it.
Yeah. And there's a lot of weird little comments that are probably inside of this that hopefully will get edited as I'm looking at my friend.
We'll edit nothing.
You edit it.
No, I actually want to
We'll
say,
edit
I do want to say
none
that
of
when
it.
you were talking about making your new work with the students, it was the most geeky art thing that you said the whole entire time.
What?
It was like adorable. It was just like you and the art school kids. You were like, I'm gonna go experiment with this, and the kids were like, it's just like one of those great like artist to artist conversations. That's so great. I love when artists talk like technique with each other.
That's what it should be.
It's so great because it's like exactly that's what it should be. And so I love that.
Well, that's what I can get hung up about art education with, because it's like, you know, it is like, hopefully I have something to offer them, and if we're just all like sitting around just being honest with each other about what we don't know and what we do know, and then offering that knowledge back and forth to each other, that's it.
And it's really good for people to know that you're making artwork and you're gonna go experiment this weekend, and you're and you're still experimenting. And like, you can just be like, I'm doing some shows and I'm fucking done. And I'm just chilling. Like I love that stuff.
No, it's the truth, and I think it's like I want them to be able to have that conversation with each other, so I have to have that conversation with them, and I have to like. And I just, in all things, it's not always easy, but in all things, it's just like, even when getting to know you guys in this moment and talking with each other, it's like, I'm just trying to be as honest as I possibly can be. I don't know where it, and like I said earlier, I don't know where it leads. I just know that this feels better to me than the possible other scenarios, you know?
Yeah.
Once again.
All right, thank you.
Woo!
All right.
Yeah.